It is a time when magic is more powerful than science, and only those who control the magic control destiny. They are the Visionaries.
The magical light. Visionaries, visionaries, knights of the magical light.
Remember when your action figures came with holograms? I'm talking about those mind-blowing, shimmering chest pieces that changed images when you tilted them in the light. Well, in 1987, Hasbro dropped what they thought would be the next Masters of the Universe. A toy line so ambitious, so technologically advanced that it literally glowed in the dark and sparkled with magic. But here's the thing. Within 2 years, it was completely dead. Today, I'm diving deep into the rise and fall of Visionary, Knights of the Magical Light. One of the most fascinating failures in 80s toy history. And trust me, this isn't just another remember this toy nostalgia trip. We're going to uncover why this line had everything going for it, but still crashed and burned. What made it so technologically revolutionary that collectors are still obsessed with it today. And the behind-the-scenes drama that doomed it from the start. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why Visionaries deserves way more respect than it gets, and why its failure might have actually changed the toy industry forever. So buckle up, because we're about to enter the age of the great unrest. The ambitious setup. Let's set the stage, because Visionaries didn't just appear out of nowhere. It was born during the absolute golden age of action figure warfare. Picture this. It's 1987. You're walking down the toy aisle at your local Toys R Us, and you're surrounded by an embarrassment of riches. He-Man is still crushing it. G.I. Joe is at its peak. Transformers are everywhere. Thundercats just launched, and kids are going absolutely insane for it. The toy industry is printing money, and every company is trying to create the next big franchise. Hasbro looks at this landscape and thinks, we need something different, something that stands out. And here's where it gets interesting. They didn't just want another sword and sorcery line. They wanted to create something that blended science fiction with fantasy in a way nobody had seen before. The concept they landed on was brilliant. A futuristic planet called Prismos, where all technology suddenly stops working, forcing society to rediscover magic. Think about that premise for a second. It's basically the reverse of every other 80s toy line. Instead of ancient magic meets modern technology, its advanced technology becomes ancient magic. That's actually a pretty sophisticated concept for a kid's toy line, and it gave the writers something genuinely interesting to work with. The planet Prismos had been this high-tech utopia. We're talking about a civilization that had mastered space travel, advanced computing, all of it. Then, one day, their 3 suns aligned in a cosmic event that happens once every 7,000 years. And boom, every machine, every computer, every piece of technology just stopped, permanently. Can you imagine? One day, you're living in the future, and the next day, you're back in the Dark Ages. Your car doesn't work. Your lights don't turn on. Nothing electronic functions anymore. It's like a permanent EMP blast across an entire planet. So society collapses into chaos, what they called the Age of the Great Unrest. And out of this chaos, 2 factions emerge. The Spectral Knights, who are basically the good guys trying to restore order, and the Darkling Lords, who want to use the chaos to seize power. But here's the kicker, and this is what made Visionaries unique. Both sides discover that magic has returned to Prismos. Real, actual magic. And the only way to access it is to go on a quest to the Iron Mountain and face the wizard Merklin. The magic system that actually made sense. Now, most 80s cartoons just threw magic around without any rules, right? He-Man lifts a castle because he's strong. Lion-O's sword does whatever the plot needs it to do that week. But Visionaries actually created a magic system with structure, and that's part of what made it so cool. Merklin, this ancient powerful wizard, doesn't just hand out magic powers like candy. He makes these warriors prove themselves. Each knight has to enter his shrine and face a challenge that tests their character. And if they succeed, they get assigned a totem animal that represents their personality. Leoric, the leader of the Spectral Knights, gets the lion because he's brave and noble. Witterquick gets the cheetah because he's fast. Ektar gets the fox because he's clever. You see where this is going. Each character's power actually reflects who they are as a person. And the Darkling Lords get the same treatment. Darkstorm, their leader, gets the mollusk, which sounds lame until you realize it represents his ability to hide his true intentions and survive in any environment. Kravix gets the Phylot, basically a flying creature, because he's always looking for the next opportunity. Even the villain's powers made thematic sense. But here's what really set Visionaries apart from every other toy line. The holograms. Oh man, those holograms. In 1987, this was cutting-edge technology. Hasbro embedded these prismatic, three-dimensional holographic images into the chest plates and staffs of every figure. When you tilted them, the image would shift and shimmer. The lion would seem to move. The bear would appear to growl. For a kid in the 80s, this was like having a piece of the future in your hands. The technology was called spectral holography, and it wasn't cheap. Each figure cost more to produce than a standard action figure because of these holographic elements. But Hasbro believed it would be worth it. This would be the gimmick that made Visionaries stand out in a crowded market. And you know what? It did stand out. The problem was whether kids would actually buy it. But we'll get to that. The vehicles that changed everything. Here's where Visionaries gets really interesting from a toy design perspective. The vehicles. Remember, the whole premise is that technology doesn't work anymore on Prismos. So, Hasbro couldn't just make laser guns and spaceships like every other sci-fi toy line. They had to get creative. What they came up with was genius. Magical vehicles powered by the knights themselves. The Spectral Knights got the Lancer cycle. These sleek, futuristic-looking motorcycles that were powered by inserting a knight's power staff into the vehicle. You'd literally plug your action figure's staff into the bike, and that's what made it go. The design was this beautiful blend of medieval knight aesthetics with sci-fi vehicle design. But the real showstopper was the Capture Chariot. This thing was massive. A rolling fortress that could hold multiple figures and had this cage on the back for capturing enemies. And just like the Lancer cycle, it was powered by inserting the knight's staffs. The play pattern was built right into the lore. Magic powers the vehicles because technology is dead. The Darkling Lords got the Skyclaw, this incredible flying vehicle that looked like a mechanical bird of prey. Again, powered by magic staffs, and it had this claw mechanism that could grab enemy figures. The design was darker, more menacing, perfectly fitting the villain aesthetic. What made these vehicles special wasn't just the design. It was that they actually meant something in the story. They weren't just random vehicles thrown in to sell more toys. They represented how this society had adapted to losing all their technology. They'd taken their knowledge of engineering and combined it with their newfound magical abilities to create something entirely new. That's sophisticated world building for a toy line. And it's part of why Visionaries has such a devoted cult following today. The cartoon that deserved better. Let's talk about the animated series, because this is where things get really frustrating. Hasbro partnered with Sunbow Productions and TMS Entertainment, the same studios behind Transformers and G.I. Joe, to create a 13-episode series that would launch alongside the toys. The show premiered in September 1987, and honestly, it was pretty damn good. The animation quality was solid. TMS was a Japanese studio that knew what they were doing. The character designs translated well from toy to screen, and the writing was surprisingly mature for a kid's show. The series opened with a 5-part miniseries called The Age of Magic Begins that told the origin story, how the technology failed, how society collapsed, how the knights gained their powers. It didn't talk down to kids. It treated the premise seriously and built out the world of Prismos in a way that made you actually care about what happened to these characters. Each episode explored different aspects of the magic system. We learned that Merklin wasn't just some benevolent wizard. He had his own agenda, and he was basically using these knights as pawns in a larger game. The Spectral Knights and Darkling Lords weren't just good guys versus bad guys. They were two factions with genuinely different philosophies about how to rebuild their civilization. And the show had consequences. When a character used their magic, it would drain them. They couldn't just spam their powers endlessly, like in other cartoons. Resources were scarce. The stakes felt real. But here's the problem. Only 13 episodes were produced. 13. That's it. One season, and done. Why? Because by the time the show was airing, Hasbro was already seeing the writing on the wall with the toy sales. The show was essentially an expensive commercial for the toys, and if the toys weren't selling, there was no reason to keep producing episodes. So just as the series was finding its footing, just as the world building was getting really interesting, it was canceled. No resolution, no finale, just over. And that, my friends, is one of the great tragedies of 80s animation. Why it all fell apart. So, here's the million-dollar question. Why did Visionaries fail? This toy line had everything going for it. Revolutionary holographic technology, solid character designs, a unique premise, a well-produced cartoon, major retail distribution, Hasbro's marketing muscle behind it. So what went wrong? The answer is complicated, but it basically comes down to three major factors: timing, cost, and competition. First, the timing was terrible. Visionaries launched in 1987, which seems like it should have been perfect, right in the middle of the action figure boom. But here's what people forget. 1987 was also when the market started to get saturated. There were too many toy lines competing for the same dollars. He-Man was declining, but still on shelves. G.I. Joe was everywhere. Transformers were huge. Thundercats had just launched and was the hot new thing. And then you had smaller lines like Mask, Silverhawks, and others, all fighting for attention. Kids only have so much allowance money, and parents only have so much patience for buying action figures. Visionaries was entering an incredibly crowded market, and it needed to be absolutely perfect to break through. It wasn't enough to be good. It had to be better than everything else. Second, the cost was prohibitive. Those beautiful holographic chest pieces and staffs. They made the figures expensive to produce, which meant they were expensive to buy. A basic Visionaries figure cost more than a comparable G.I. Joe or Transformer. And while the holograms were cool, kids couldn't actually play with them the way they could play with Transformer or pose a G.I. Joe with all its articulation points. The holograms were impressive technology, but they didn't enhance the play pattern enough to justify the higher price point. Parents looked at a Visionaries figure and a G.I. Joe figure and thought, why am I paying more for this? Third, the competition was just too fierce. This is the big one. Visionaries wasn't competing against weak toy lines. It was up against some of the most successful franchises in toy history. And those franchises had something Visionaries didn't: established fan bases. By 1987, kids had been playing with Transformers for 3 years. They'd been watching G.I. Joe for 4 years. They had emotional connections to those characters and those worlds. Visionaries was asking them to abandon those connections and invest in something completely new. And here's the brutal truth. Most kids weren't willing to do that. The toy industry is hit-driven, and Visionaries just didn't become a hit fast enough. Hasbro needed it to explode out of the gate, and it didn't. Sales were disappointing from the start, and once that happens, it's almost impossible to recover. Retailers started discounting the figures. The cartoon got canceled. And by 1988, just 1 year after launch, Visionaries was essentially dead. The legacy that lives on. But here's where the story gets interesting again. Visionaries never really went away. Sure, the toy line died. The cartoon was canceled. Hasbro moved on to other projects. But something strange happened over the years. Visionaries developed this devoted cult following of collectors and fans who recognized what the franchise could have been. Those holographic figures? They're highly collectible now. Mint-in-box Visionaries toys sell for serious money on eBay. The technology that seemed like a gimmick in 1987 is now seen as a fascinating piece of toy history, a moment when Hasbro tried to push the boundaries of what an action figure could be. And the cartoon has been rediscovered by a new generation through YouTube and streaming. People watch those 13 episodes and think, wait, this is actually really good. Why didn't this succeed? There have been multiple attempts to revive the franchise. IDW Publishing did a comic book series that continued the story. There have been rumors of reboots and reimaginings. Hasbro still owns the property, and every few years there's talk of bringing it back. Because here's the thing, the core concept of Visionaries is timeless. A high-tech civilization that loses its technology and has to rediscover magic? That's a story that resonates even more today than it did in 1987. We're more dependent on technology now than ever before. The idea of it all suddenly stopping is genuinely terrifying and fascinating. Visionaries was ahead of its time in a lot of ways. The world building was more sophisticated than most toy lines. The magic system had actual rules and limitations. The premise asked interesting questions about the relationship between technology and society. It just had the misfortune of launching at exactly the wrong moment, in exactly the wrong market conditions, at exactly the wrong price point. So, what's the lesson here? What can we learn from the rise and fall of Visionaries? I think it's this. Being good isn't always enough. You can have great ideas, innovative technology, solid execution, and still fail if the timing isn't right. The toy industry, like any entertainment industry, is brutal. It's not just about quality. It's about capturing lightning in a bottle at exactly the right moment. Visionaries didn't fail because it was bad. It failed because it was good in a market that demanded greatness, and it couldn't quite get there fast enough. But you know what? I'm glad Visionaries existed. I'm glad Hasbro took the risk. I'm glad they tried to do something different, something innovative, something that pushed the boundaries of what a toy line could be. Because even though it failed commercially, it succeeded in creating something memorable. Those of us who had these toys as kids remember them fondly. The collectors who hunt them down today appreciate the craftsmanship and ambition. And the fans who discovered the cartoon years later recognize the quality of the storytelling. Visionaries' Knights of the Magical Light burned bright and fast, just like the magic on Prismos itself. And maybe that's fitting. Maybe some things aren't meant to last forever. Maybe they're meant to shine brilliantly for a brief moment, and then become legends. And in the end, isn't that more interesting than just being another successful toy line that faded into obscurity? The age of magic may have ended on Prismos, but for those of us who remember, the magic of Visionaries lives on. Thanks for sticking with me through this deep dive into Visionaries. But here's the thing. This is just one of dozens of forgotten 80s toy lines that deserved better. If you want to see me break down another ambitious failure from the golden age of action figures, click on the video appearing on your screen right now, where I explore the rise and fall of another toy line that tried to compete with the giants and came up short. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. And if you grew up with Visionaries, drop a comment below and let me know. Did you have any of these figures? Do you remember the cartoon? Let's keep this conversation going. Until next time, may the age of magic never truly end.